Real quick, before we begin, please do not harass anyone mentioned or discussed in this video. Not only is this something that really never helps anything, but I also think everyone discussed in this video is probably overall an okay and fine person that doesn't need to be viewed in a negative light, really, for any of this. As you'll find out, the video is not really about them as much as it is about me. I'm the center of attention for this video. So, with that being said, let's get on with it. One of the things that I hold close to me is my values, the positions that I have, the opinions I espouse, and most importantly, the thought processes that I've gone through to arrive at all of these conclusions. I don't know if I'm particularly good at it, but when I think about what makes me, me, it's something that I really do try to emphasize about myself. Thankfully, I think I do a good enough job when it comes to knowing what I think about something and not feeling so ungrounded from principles and morality that I can be led to believe just any old thing. But there's a sort of, it's trivial, but it's a wacky exception to this that's stuck with me. I feel like every time I engage with Jonathan Blow's game, The Witness, and media critique and analysis that surrounds it, my opinions just happen to change based on whatever the last thing was that I absorbed. Again, it's like a goofy random thing to think about, but I want to talk about it real quick. Since The Witness's release in 2016, there's been a chain of about 5 or 6 videos that have continued to reshape how I view the game and how I view people talk about it. I'm going to try to run through the timeline real quick. I'm also going to try not to spoil anything big about The Witness in this video, in case you haven't played it yet and are interested in it. If there are things that I reference that deserve more detail, you'll probably find that in the comments. So, I played The Witness in 2016. I really liked it. It's a game chock full of puzzles, and it teaches you the rules of how to solve those puzzles without any words, just by solving simple puzzles and slowly working your way through more complicated ones. Everything is conveyed with just symbols and drawing lines on a grid. I loved unlocking the different areas and exploring the beautiful but slightly surreal and haunting island, and I especially loved picking up bits and pieces of the hidden story and uncovering the big secrets that the island had to offer. It wasn't the easiest game in the world for me. There were some puzzle sections that I really struggled with, but at the end of it I definitely felt like I had dove into something special. I really wish I could play it again for the first time, as it's one of those games where the only true obstacle is your lack of knowledge, and it's a type of game that I've really come to enjoy over the past couple of years. Then, probably about a year later after I played, I watched Joseph Anderson's video about The Witness titled A Great Game That You Shouldn't Play. Anderson's video makes the case that there are things about the way the puzzles are structured that were unfair, and he leveraged that the world building and story elements were told in a way that showed that Jonathan Blow was kind of playing his fanbase a bit, throwing them for a loop, playing a sick joke on them with the making of this game. If you've played the game, you can probably understand what is meant by that. And I left that video thinking that maybe The Witness was not this stellar game that I originally had made it out to be. Already the highly impressionable nature of this little dynamic is setting in. And there were a couple moments in Anderson's video that really stuck with me, especially when it came to his critiques of how Jonathan Blow told the game's story. I've watched the video a few times, and I really did find it highly inspiring. There's another video that connects here at this point in the story, but I'm actually not going to mention it just yet. We'll talk about it later. A couple years passed, and eventually, for some reason, I found myself playing The Witness again. With the second playthrough, I kept in mind Joseph Anderson's video, and I realized as I was playing that some things that he said didn't make much sense now that I was playing it again. I thought that maybe he got some things wrong in his video. And soon after, I watched another video analyzing The Witness by Electron Dance, which further convinced me that perhaps Anderson's critiques of the game pertaining to the plot message and the gameplay elements were lacking in specific ways. So The Witness became, once again, it's the game that I wholeheartedly enjoyed and remembered fondly. Eventually, 2022 rolled along, and I found a new video that properly turned this collection of critiques into a new miniseries. All Iron Talks published a refutation of Joseph Anderson's The Witness, a great game that you shouldn't play, in which, well, it's basically a response video to Anderson's video. She talked about some of the same things that I had previously internally thought Anderson got wrong, and by the end I definitely felt more solid in my opinions of The Witness and the obviously flawed nature of Anderson's video. I didn't think All Iron Talks' video was perfect, but otherwise I thought this was the end of the line. Everything's good, everything's fine. I went on to make a video of my own, where I reviewed a bunch of games in my Steam library, and I chatted in the comments about Anderson's and All Iron Talks videos when I talked about The Witness. At this point, I thought everything was settled for good. Until recently, when the final video hits my recommended feed. Puppy Helix Triangle released a video titled, quote, A refutation of Joseph Anderson's The Witness, a great game you shouldn't play. And I watch it, and you already know what I'm going to say about it because you've watched the beginning of my video. Everything unravels, the response video chain is solidified, and of course I think Puppy Helix Triangle is right when they say that All Iron was cruel and unfair to Joseph Anderson and everything else. I have no sense of grounding for knowing what is truly right. Maybe Joseph Anderson was correct this whole time. Everything is all over the place. It's a mess. I can't get the puzzle at the entrance to the quarry out of my head. It lives in a quantum state in my brain as to whether it's fair or it's unfair. I have no idea what to think about it. I'm just going to have to live with that forever. It's fine. Everything's in disarray, but it's okay. We accept it. It's all well and good, me just ping-ponging between different opinions that YouTubers have about games and other YouTubers having opinions on those YouTubers. It's classic stuff. But there actually is something more personal to me that I noticed that began to stick out while I was re-ingesting all of this discourse. Common themes, patterns, and just things that I think are important for me to give a voice to because there's something here that I realized that I have a very strong connection to. And what do I mean by that? Well, in Joseph Anderson's video, it's obvious that he does not like the taste that Jonathan Blow and The Witness left in his mouth. But it's more than that. Anderson says that
there are two reasons that I feel obligated to bring him up. The first, less important reason is that Jonathan Blow is one of many people that got me thinking about making this YouTube channel. I've watched several of the talks he has given and been consistently impressed by what he has to say.
And he also states that Jonathan Blow's name is a video game developer and director name that's probably more than likely going to be recognized by people. The guy made Braid, a game that I've been told is important because I'd never heard of it before then and haven't played it. This is to say, in certain contexts, Jonathan Blow's a big deal. So that makes it very important to discuss the fact that this game developer has made a game that feels off, it feels wrong, like a trick is being played on us, the players. This sort of accusation is not one that's completely a stranger to Jonathan Blow because while he's in the past been seen as a good game developer, he's also been accused of being very pretentious and full of himself.
Jonathan Blow, the driving force behind The Witness, has been lauded as both a genius and a pretentious git, sometimes even in the same breath.
It's not necessarily a situation where Anderson feels like he has to, knock Jonathan Blow down a few pegs, but it's definitely a situation where someone he's looked up to and who is seen as famous deserves a bit of critique. Now, moving on to All Iron Talks video, this theme that I just mentioned is actually repeated a fair amount, though not perfectly. Anderson himself is not a stranger in the group of YouTubers who make video essays about video games. In fact, doing a quick search of YouTubers who are known for making video essays about video games shows that he's mentioned in a fair few articles, and Iron is intent on pointing out that this video has a lot of views, and people seem to agree with it a lot.
It is only my intention to ask how this video got so much praise and so many views when he so clearly missed the mark. Anderson's video has nearly 5 million views. Downloading a browser extension will tell you that his video has way more likes than it does dislikes, so clearly people agree with what he has to say, or at the very least, find his essay compelling even if they disagree. The comments are mostly just people who played the game reflecting on their experiences with it, regardless of the content of the video. Other than those, most of the comments are positive, with a few gentle nudges on things that he obviously got wrong, that we will talk about later on. Very few of the comments are actually critical of the video itself, but several of the top comments mention that they've never played the game, but that the video was so well put together that they like watching it. So how could Chris and I disagree with this video so violently.
So there's a similar theme set up. This is a small YouTuber that sees, for all intents and purposes, a popular YouTuber in their space, and is motivated to critique his video and explain to people why the overall praise is not really deserved. And I'm not unfamiliar with this video response setup. I did the same thing to the YouTuber Tech Lead a couple of years ago. And over the course of this video, Iron calls Anderson, well, not pretentious, per se, but definitely, quote, a fundamentally incurious person, and thinks that he is too dismissive of puzzles and situations that he doesn't immediately understand.
And then he just straight up admits that
They might even say that the mystery and wonder of knowing will always be more enjoyable than really finding out, which I think is bullshit since there's already enough to wonder at in the world.
in the Folding Ideas video about Nostalgia Critic's review and parody recreation of Pink Floyd's The Wall, Dan Olson calls Doug Walker a fundamentally incurious person.
Doug wants to be a filmmaker. He wants to make art, but he can't because he's a fundamentally incurious person who isn't much interested in what other people think or feel, and all his ideas boil down to, what if Batman met Mario?
And while he says this in one line, in passing, this phrase has really stuck with me. And while it might seem a mean-spirited or unkind thing to say about someone, that's the vibe that I'm getting from Anderson here.
Okay, breaking out of the videoception here, it's important to note how Iron is borrowing a quote here from another video essayist, who I also happen to highly admire, and uses it to characterize the main through line with her critique of Anderson. Just gonna put a pin in that. All in all, her video is not a perfect repetition of how Anderson characterizes Jonathan Blow, but it definitely rhymes. And lastly, we'll discuss Puppy Helix Triangle's video. This video breaks with a lot of the patterns discussed so far, even though it's a direct response to the direct response. Puppy Helix not the underdog here, as far as subscriber numbers are concerned, so there's no similar setup with a popularity dynamic. It's more or less just a straightforward takedown of Iron's thoughts and arguments, with the added flavor of Puppy Helix pointing out how Iron comes across as rather cruel and unnecessarily dismissive of things that Anderson has said. Really, aside from it being the latest video in this chain, the only thing that keeps the thing going is that it's a classic video response to another creator, with all of the built-in features that comes with that. So the stage is set. We have this theme of video essayists perceiving video game developers and other video essayists as people who are more or less confidently incorrect. But what does this have to do with me, exactly? Well, for that we have to discuss the other video in this web that I skipped over previously. See, Puppy Helix video really hit me with the realization that you can criticize someone like we've talked about, but in doing so you run the risk of not just being criticized yourself, but also going about it in ways that can be seen as particularly mean-spirited or off-putting, or otherwise pretentious and dismissive, even if that's the thing that you're criticizing. That kind of makes it sound like I've only just started being on YouTube, like everyone's mean and attacks each other on YouTube, and I'm not saying I'm new to that. But when it becomes personal, there's a high potential that you step back and see it in a different light, and Puppy Helix video further reinforced and just sort of like pushed over the line the fact that self-reflection was necessary on another video that I myself have made in the past, back in 2017, called The Point of It All, a Submachine Rant. If you're a regular viewer, this is where you start really paying attention. If you've been a close follower of my channel for a while, you definitely know exactly what Submachine is and how I've gone about discussing it in the past. Assuming that I'm wrong, Submachine is an episodic point-and-click room escape game series that started out being published on Flash platforms in 2005, and in 2023 it was remastered as Submachine Legacy for release on Steam and itch.io. It has been essentially my prime hyperfixation since I got on board with it in early 2013. It's a science fiction series that tells its story in a way that motivates players to try to answer the many questions it poses, and I leapt at the chance to join the fan community's efforts to discuss and theorize at great length about what the complete story is and what exactly is all going on. Up until around 2019 or 2020, I immersed myself completely in constant production of fan art, conversations with a great deal of community members, edits on the Submachine wiki, and even a bit of finished and unfinished fanfiction. I could simply not get enough of Submachine, and I really enjoyed the presence in the community that the developer, Mateusz Skutnik, had. Skutnik was simultaneously playing the role of the elusive mastermind of his fictional universe, and also someone who was an explorer or a traveler just like us, answering questions with more questions, sharing gaps in knowledge of his own world, and carrying us further on the ride throughout 10 main games in the series and a few games on the side. Sometimes questions were answered, and even more were produced. He was the god of the world, even though I personally tried not to call him that. And since Submachine was so present in my own life, he became a central figure to that as well, in a way. And in turn, I became a central figure to his community. And when I started making Submachine playthrough videos and videos with theories trying to answer Submachine's questions inspired by my favorite YouTube channels at the time like Markiplier and the Game Theorists, it did nothing but solidify this link that I had with this secret and secluded but vibrant world. However, over time, the questions that I was trying to answer through my videos, forum posts, and chat messages, along with the sense of wonder that supported all of it, slowly turned to frustration. There were always more questions than answers. Some seemed impossible to solve, I thought, especially with new knowledge of how logic systems worked and some physics as well, provided by the undergrad degree that I had started. You take one course in Intro to Proofs and suddenly you know how to logically work your way through anything. And I started to doubt whether Mateusz Skutnik really had control of his own story, as the pieces never could be put together in a way that quite made sense. Was there even a complete puzzle possible for the Submachine story? The frustration only continued as I figured out what new Submachine theory video I could make for my growing subscriber base on YouTube. The edits that I was making on the pages to the Submachine wiki quickly became a stand-in for offline social happenings, which I had never really been good at while growing up anyway. And, unfortunately, eventually, it boiled over.
I must admit that this video has been pretty hard to make, not because I feel a strong emotional detachment or anything from theorizing or anything like that, but instead because I've had to rewrite the script on this one several times until I found one that got my points across as concisely and accurately as possible. I'm tired of always having more questions than answers from the Submachine series. Submachine has clearly at this point looked at all of that and said, nah, never mind, and instead is pointedly dragging this out as long as possible, giving it a story but not actually telling you what that story is and how you're related to it. And honestly, 90% of the time, Mateusz seems less like he's interested in telling a well-put-together story, and instead decided to invest his resources in buying a mystery generator. Maybe the more questions people have, the more they'll enjoy the series? ? You can tell at this point I don't care. I really don't. I can't believe it took me this long to realize something was rotten about these games, but it's there spelled out to us in plain sight. He's had 12 long years to figure out that the community is driven by not knowing everything, and that is why he feels he has to keep coming up with new concepts for us to marvel at and try to figure out how to fit the pieces of the puzzle together. It's like a circus full of magic tricks where as soon as people in the audience start questioning how a trick works, it's time to move on to another tent, folks. Maybe someone in the future will come along and disprove everything that I just said and show us all that we were all stupid and missed a few pixels that bring everything together. In fact, maybe that's the best thing for this series, is for us to make a ruckus and get the Submachine games popular again so MatPat from the Game Theorists or someone will swoop in and claim another game series as solved. I know that it doesn't matter to me because I feel that for the last few years I've been played to an extent. I've been playing a game that I didn't want to play this entire time.
I'm going to stop right here and say, if you're familiar with Joseph Anderson's video, you can tell that I had definitely taken it closely to heart, even repeating some of the same hard-hitting word choices that he did. And years before Iron's video was ever published, I ended that video in a similar way to how she did.
I want to end this video from a quote from a game reviewer on YouTube named Joseph Anderson, who has a pretty strong opinion on games that leave you to fill in the holes yourself. It's not a viewpoint that I've ever really considered before, and the quote is from a review that he did on The Witness. I find myself agreeing with what he says more and more. Thank you for watching, and I await your comments below and on the forum.
The problem with many incredible books can come from how they're often difficult to read and fully understand, from Finnegan's Wake to something like Catch-22, which some people can understandably struggle with. That's also my favorite book, by the way. This idea of complexity equals worth can be infectious. The idea takes root that in order for something to be worth your time, that it has to be difficult to understand in some way. These people are missing the point. The complexity needs to be worth it for something in the book, not for the sake of complexity itself. So you have so many stories that are intentionally obtuse. They don't like giving you information. They might even say that the mystery and wonder of knowing will always be more enjoyable than really finding out, which I think is bullshit since there's already enough to wonder at in the world, although again, I am certain that some exceptional stories could pull it off. But the worst part of all of this is how it can lead to experiences that are impenetrable in two ways.
Joseph Anderson's video really did come along at the perfect time to bring into focus my thoughts that I had been having with Submachine at the time, and not just the logical thoughts themselves, but all of the emotions fermented by being a fan of the series for multiple years prior. So what do we do with this information? Clearly, the story has been explored multiple times over at this point, and this is my take on being critical and cutting towards someone popular in a certain context. Mateusz Skutnik is the most popular person in his own community. Was I trying to take him down a couple notches with this video? At the time, I think I was. But as time passed, I wasn't very proud of it, so I ended up privating this video, though I think I'll make it unlisted and throw a link in the description if you're interested in watching it. Part of me still agrees and supports a lot of what I said in the video, just in terms of like story inconsistency and the frustration from everything never really gelling together in a satisfying way. But over time, and as the Submachine games continued to evolve, and I listened to other perspectives on how stories are often told, I feel like I've softened quite a bit. I tell you all of this to highlight how many different things I was bringing into this video, and to just illustrate how the entire conversation is not just the words spoken that you're hearing, but it's the sum of everything related that brought me to that point. For yet another example, in case you're wondering, in this rant video, the reason my voice sounds a bit canned was I was recording it in my car because I didn't want to have to explain to my parents, who I was living with at the time, why I was spending so much time on this hyperfixation of mine that they only really knew bits and pieces of at this point. So that's just another example of something that I was like bringing into the relative amount of harsh cutting words that I had in the video. But either way, after saying all of that, I guess I now wonder what to do with respect to the other videos that I've talked about. Like, how do I think of them? I don't think it's appropriate to make guesses as to why each of these people might have decided to make the videos that they did. We can only really go off of what they've told us themselves. And anyway, like I said in the very beginning, I'm making this video just to share thoughts that I've had about this whole drawn-out saga. Part of me wants to treat Anderson a certain way because I think parts of his video are flawed. Still. But I also recognize how it feels to be frustrated by someone that you respect. Part of me wants to look at Iron in a certain light because I think Puppy Helix's characterization of her as unnecessarily cruel is kind of correct, but I also know what it's like to feel like the larger audience of a YouTube video needs to sort of be woken up and understand that a video that they like actually has flaws that are going unnoticed. It offers an explanation, though that's not an excuse. And part of me knows that each of these videos were made with genuine beliefs and motivations behind them, and that being mindful of what each video is trying to communicate is important. But the other part of me realizes how relatively trivial this all is, compared to anything else that's happening anywhere as I type this. Largely, it just made me ruminate on the whole matter to the point that I want to share it with others, using the best words that I can. And maybe those thoughts aren't super clear and I haven't come to really any good conclusions at this point in the video, but I do want to say that out of my time spent in the fog thinking about The Witness and its associated discourse, as well as the past couple years that I've spent ever since I released my last video reviewing games in my Steam library, at least a couple things have precipitated out of it, and one of those things is that my relationship with talking about games has changed. In that video, I took 37 games and spent a minute or less on each one trying to talk about it in a way that felt unique and special to my experience, and then I slapped it with a score out of 10. And I did try making it clear that there was no real weight placed on the scores, as I tried to instead focus on the anecdotes that I had with each game, the personal stuff. But now it's even more clear to me that the real thing that I enjoy and seek out about talking about video games and other forms of media is all of the conversations that I have with myself, the game itself, fans, other commentators, and even developers if I'm lucky. It's one thing to assign a metric by which to judge a video game and rule on it in that way, but it's another to look at the total experience that I have had pertaining to the game in all its forms. And I think that's much more enriching. I don't think games are made They're definitely not made to be critiqued. They're made as a mode of artistic communication between the developers and the players. As I said in the game review video, what was not the most important thing to me about playing Riven, the sequel to Myst, was an attempt to objectively measure the quality of the puzzles or the gameplay. It was the fact that I was recommended it by a friend, and that I had questions about whether I could handle playing an older computer game in a point-and-click format when I thought that I would have more fun playing it in a more modern free movement 3D format instead, and I was wrong. My thoughts on a story about my uncle can't be accurately summed up with the number 4. That doesn't convey how specifically I realized what types of games I was into, and what it was like to play a game that I thought wouldn't quite jive with my personal aesthetic, and how I still managed to appreciate how there were certain design choices that I enjoyed, and how much of that enjoyment was seeing familiar elements from a game that I did really like happen to be reframed in a different setting. I didn't even talk about the Old City Leviathan, I just mentioned it in passing, but I easily could have probably spent a few minutes talking about how it didn't grab me at all because I didn't meet it on its own terms and pacing, and instead I just impatiently blew through it, expecting like some more actionable adventure. And no amount of YouTube algorithm-friendly time is going to capture exactly what it was like playing through Animal Well, both with my friend watching me start it after they had already played for a few hours themselves, and then several Discord calls, 20 gameplay hours, and 100 chat messages later when I ended up finishing the game before they did, and we were trying to figure out how to talk about the nice cozy game that we were both playing at the same time without spoiling each other. That's the truly important stuff, and that's the type of thing that I want to tap into more if and when I talk about video games in the future. With Submachine, it's a game series that, given my lifeline to the developer, I'd want to use the time to tap into Mateusz's head directly, and show what the experience of building a game series and its story for almost 20 years now has been like from his perspective. Hell, maybe I'll even extend a similar courtesy to Jonathan Blow, as I've heard he's also been really interested in communicating to people what he sees in The Witness. That's kind of a joke. I've seen that one clip from Indie Game the movie, but still, like, there's value in exploring the dynamic of how he wants to communicate with people through his work. All of this can also be applied to YouTube video creators themselves with their videos too, as YouTube videos are also creative works. Thanks for watching, everyone. This was a video that was less directed than other videos that I've made, but I just felt the need to get the thoughts out there because it was a really interesting little thing to ponder. Just wanted to make peace with it, and hopefully you'll join the continued conversation in the comments below. Be nice.